Arkansas has one of the largest state-owned fish hatchery systems in the nation, and the Game and Fish Commission's Joe Hogan Hatchery at Lone Oak has been growing fish almost as long as the commission has existed.
It's really interesting when you go back and look at the history of the agency and see where this hatchery came into being. It was very early in the history of the agency. The agency was starting, 1915, and in 1927, those early commissioners were already looking for a central location to create what they termed the world's largest fish hatchery. They purchased the land in 1928. 276 acres is what they purchased. When the construction was completed sometime in the 1950s, I believe there was 214 acres of ponds and 57 ponds total. So it took them a long time to get that construction completed. They really didn't have any equipment when they started. They had a lot of guys with shovels and wagons and mules and dirt slips, and they just picked at it for many, many years. But when it was completed in the 1950s, it basically looked the same from the 1950s until now, so almost 50, 60 years. The configuration of the hatchery really hasn't changed up until recently.
Early Game and Fish employees carved the hatchery out of an existing rice farm and immediately started raising sport fish.
So in 1929, they had largemouth bass and crappie that they had collected from the White River, brought those in and put those in those first 16 ponds, and were able to harvest those ponds in 1929. So there's been fish harvested from Joe Hogan in stock since 1929.
Although methods and techniques have changed over the decades, the Joe Hogan Hatchery has consistently produced fish for the enjoyment of Arkansans. These days, the hatchery turns out several million fish each year.
In 2016, we're around 1.7, 1.8 million fish that was cultured and stocked. However, we do a lot of fish for other facilities that doesn't really fall into that same category. So we may culture 5, 6, 7 million fish, and a lot of those may go to other facilities for further grow out. So annually, we produce around 6 million fish and may stock anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million of those into public waters.
Aquaculture techniques have improved since the early days of the Joe Hogan Hatchery, but one thing that hasn't changed is the labor-intensive nature of the fish business.
It is a lot, and I will say this, when I first started, it was overwhelming, a lot more so than it is now. But I'm surrounded by a pretty good group of guys, and everybody knows their role and everybody knows their job, and they're eager to come to work, and they enjoy what we're doing here. And they can see a tangible product going out that's providing opportunities for people to harvest. And I think that's part of the reason that we've got guys that come to work eager to do this every day. So it's easier for me when you've got a crew of guys that's eager to come to work every day and get after it. So I'm fortunate to have the crew that I've got.
The Joe Hogan State Fish Hatchery grows several species of fish, but the Lone Oak facility is most well known for growing whisker fish.
We're the flagship facility for catfish in the state of Arkansas. So all the catfish that are spawned at Joe Hogan State Fish Hatchery. So we do all the channel catfish and blues and flatheads here, and then we'll ship those fry or fingerlings to other hatcheries for further grow out. But we've got a pretty large crew here. And it takes the majority of us to be able to get around one of these 8, 9, 10 acre ponds and harvest those ponds. And you don't want to do it with a short crew or not be efficient at what you're doing, because it's a lot of time and energy devoted to try and get those ponds out. And if you don't do it effectively and you only catch a small percentage of what you need, then you may have to do it again. So if we're going to get out there and harvest, then we need to be able to catch as much as we can. So we've got a lot of guys out there on tractors pulling the seines and trying to keep our lines down so we can get most fish caught that we can in one drag. We get started sometime around the second week of May with blue catfish. We spawn those first. We have to get in here and get in with the fish, obviously, and sometimes when you're like harvesting blue catfish for spawning, you know, there's no other way to do that other than to pair up those 50, 60-pound blues and get them in a sack, and you just have to manhandle them and get them in there and then carry them across the levees. There's just no really easy way to do it. We'll pair the blue catfish up in our spawning cages and give them a big, large spawning container to get in a 55-gallon drum. And then we do the same process for channel catfish, where we provide them with a spawning container. That's a little bit later in the year. They're usually around the end of May until about mid-June, when water temperatures get above 75 degrees. They'll spawn in the containers, and then we'll bring the eggs back to our facility and we'll hatch the eggs inside.
With the notable exception of these antique milk cans, the catfish spawn in the ponds the same way they do in the wild, with females laying thousands of eggs and males fertilizing the mass. But nature gets a helping hand when hatchery workers move the eggs into the hatchery's spawning shed. The controlled environment inside the building yields a higher percentage of hatched eggs. The crew takes a weight of the spawn to determine the number of individual eggs, and then it's into the spawning vats, where gently circulating water bathes the eggs in the oxygen needed for proper incubation. It takes about a week for the eggs to hatch. At this stage, they're called egg sac fry. The young fish feed on their egg sacs for a few days before their mouths are fully formed. At that point, they can be moved to round tanks and started on a diet of processed feed. Altogether, the indoor part of the spawning process takes from 12 to 14 days.
We'll hatch the eggs inside, culture the fry to a size that's suitable for stocking, and then we'll move them out to our ponds for further grow out.
The intended purpose of the catfish determines the amount of time they spend in hatchery ponds. Some are moved to nursery ponds or other hatcheries to be grown to certain sizes. Others spend more time here before being loaded onto trucks for stocking in Arkansas lakes and streams. But over their first year of life, they frequently change addresses as hatchery workers carry out the demanding work of catfish culture.
It's a year-long process, even though the spawning season's really short. It's only, you know, a month and a half or so, and then we're done. But you're constantly moving fish around to get to those other stages that you're trying to culture to. So you're moving fish, you're changing densities in ponds to reach a certain stocking size, and then on top of that, there's the constant feeding and managing those ponds and aerating those ponds and checking oxygen at night. So there's a lot that goes into catfish culture. A lot of research and science that's gone into catfish culture over the last 10 or 15 years, just so producers could become more efficient and be more cost efficient and get more bang for their buck. And a lot of that has trickled down to us as well. So we've tried to become more efficient in what we do. We'll probably produce around 2 million catfish fry, both blues and channels, and well, that includes flatheads as well. But as far as what we stock out into public waters, from this facility, it's probably about 200,000 catfish are stocked out into public waters, and most of those are a food-sized fish or an 8-inch fish, or what we call a yearling fish for some of the bigger lakes.
Regardless of where the fish end up, they wouldn't be there without the dedication of these Game and Fish employees at the Joe Hogan Hatchery.
I think these guys are really excited about what they do here. So for them to go out and harvest a catchable size catfish pond is a lot of work, but at the same time, they know that they're providing angling opportunities for somebody in a put and take type fishery. So I really think that that's part of their motivation. They're really good at what they do. They're a good bunch of guys that can get in here and get after it.
The end result is a fish truck full of catfish, traveling Arkansas roadways en route to a waterway near you.